Why don't we go ahead and get started, and hopefully they'll bring more chairs in and more tables and people could get comfortable. Thank you all for being here. This is amazing. Performance measurement is such a riveting topic that I know it drew you all here. We're excited about that. I'm going to introduce myself. I'll let my colleague Steve introduce himself, and then we'll ask you all to introduce yourself quickly. We have a lot to cover in a short period of time, and we look forward to learning with you. My name is Judy Shanley, and I work at the National Office of Easter Seals in Chicago. And Easter Seals is a partner on a federal grant funded by the Federal Transit Administration called the National Center for Mobility Management. And I'll tell you more about that project in a bit, but I'll let Steve introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here. My name is Steve Workman. I am a consultant currently working with NCMM, but in my day job, I'm also the director of Transport New Hampshire in the state of New Hampshire. I live right across the border in Maine, so I guess you'd say I'm a Mainer. So your ears perk for me to throw out some of that New England stuff. Yes. Anyhow, it's great to be here. My job with Transport New Hampshire is I'm a statewide advocacy and support agency. So you basically say I work in the spaces between all the providers and the different agencies and the state agencies to try to do the best we can for public transit, bike ed, and other active forms of transportation.
Thank you. We're excited to work with Steve on this project. It's going to be a little difficult, but I want you all to introduce yourselves and tell us where you're from. And the other thing we'd love to hear is what your expectation was when you saw the title of this presentation, Mobility Management, the Magic of Performance Metrics and Sustainability. What do you hope to get out of this? What do you want to leave with? Steve and I want to be sure that we're targeted in what we talk to you about. So why don't we start here?
Good afternoon, Gary Ludwig from Trailblazer Transit, just west of the Twin Cities, 5311 public transit system, 3 counties. Show me the magic. I'm lured in with the magic. So.
We'll do some magic tricks for you. How's that?
My name is Corey Baco, and I'm watching here in Wisconsin. I have a driver program, and I have a as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm Joe Secretary for Southwestern Wisconsin Community Program. This program is called Build, the car loan program for lower income, and that's a program called LIFT, and Director of Transportation.
Multiple hats. Right?
I'm Laura Fix, and I'm from Wisconsin, and I'm Assistant Director of Transportation.
I'm Bob Hamilton, and I take orders from Jeff, Lori, mobility management for Adams and Juneau County to Southwest Pass.
I'm Carl Schulte. I work for a company that tries to make electric vehicle fleets in public transit. We're running Green Cab in Madison now, Van Gogh in Madison. We're just starting at Black River Falls. We feel a lot more on Black River Falls.
Wonderful.
Tori Lucas, the transit project manager for the
Nice.
Mike Hanson from Jefferson County, Wisconsin. Here, mobility management for our county, programs, and some great Excel spreadsheets.
Nice. Metrics.
Good afternoon. I'm Willie McDonough. I'm the general manager for the transit system, City of Racine. We run the demand response and power. And I'm here just to learn whatever I can learn to help me run that system.
Thank you for being here.
My name is Sherry Nutt, and I am mobility manager area rural transit. Diane Ford, refers to the action by local transit. I'm the art, manager, and I also. Tracy Borja, social worker, the action by local transit. I will try to take you in.
Nick Lesky, United Clean Action Partnership, Southwest Minnesota.
South Hybrid, West Minnesota. Watson, Minnesota Transit.
Learn. Yeah, good, you're open. Inspection.
I'm Tom Godfrey, Minnesota Department of Transportation, Minnesota Council on Transportation Access. Representing all of us. I'm glad to be here. I'm also going to be working because I was for 31 years.
Actually, local Jefferson lines in the Alps, we live in that interstate bus area.
Lori Van Baker, I'm the transit manager for the city of Moorhead, part of the federal Moorhead network.
Hello, everybody. Trevor Young, transit manager for the city of Racine, and I've been in this role for a month, so that's why I get to work with Will. So that's the privilege.
Wonderful. Welcome to the family.
Yeah. Ron Decker, and I'm the transit manager for Two Transit in Southern Department.
My name is Nikki Jusser. I work for Career on Transit, supervisor for volunteer driving program in the area.
I'm Crystal Martin, I'm the deputy general manager at Madison Metro, and I'm here to see the latest and greatest.
Yeah. Wonderful. You're learning from the best.
General Muzzy, Administrative Program.
Jordan Smith, the facilities manager for the Department of Moorhead and Buses.
Terry Reed, skateboard assistant transit planner and marketing specialist for. We'll go from the back. I'm Shelley Dock, from Smart Transit, Southern Minnesota. I'm operations manager for Steele and Washington counties.
Kirk Chair, Smart Transit, transit manager.
Phil Yankee, the city of Madison, operations supervisor.
Justin Stuber, Madison Metro.
Letter, including air transit technology. Starting my third week in transit. So I'm going to learn everything I can while I'm on the posters. This is a great career.
Chris Fox, manager in Air Transit with Washington County Transit.
I still have your bus, Chris.
Good.
Sitting on my desk. Great bus, it's a treasure.
Steve Thomas, Transit Operations Manager for City of Oshkosh.
Children Bill, traffic specialist for Milwaukee County Transit.
With the East Central Regional Development Commission, and we're working on our regional transportation coordinating council. Central Minnesota.
And my name is Tammy Butler, and I'm new to the RTCC as well, and I work in UNICEF plus Flex County.
Terry Smith with the Minnesota RTCC.
Kevin Sturman, Minnesota Building Trade.
Is that the Minnesota section?
Tori Hill, Department of Transportation, Office of Transit Act.
Laura Sherrington, Madison Metro Fair Transit eligibility, mobility coordinator.
Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Lichtig. I'm in the Minnesota Department of Transportation, and I'm a project manager with mobility management projects.
I'm Ramona Dejarli, program director for Rotary Transit.
I'm Renee Stately, one of the assistant transit.
Shannon Landwick, Cross County Transit.
Bobby Craig, Director of Transportation, Center for Independent Customer Discovery.
Yay. You got a civil here.
Yes. By transportation in
and I'm the regional representative.
I'm David Green, I'm the Chief Operations Officer for St. Cloud, I'm also St. Cloud. So
I'm agreeing with the managers that St. Cloud.
Michael Kudrowski, planning manager, St. Cloud Trust.
Daniel Brown, the mobility manager at the other counties.
Alan Herman, village manager, Scott Towers, from part of the 7
Mark Morgan, Oakland County Transit, we're TCAP and Jim Markstro, Joey Penker, Administrative Supervisor, City of Mankato. Show me the numbers.
Eric Schaefer with Mankato Transit, scheduler and dispatcher with Mankato Mobility for Transit. Yeah, just looking at the metrics.
Ben Sparks, City of Mankato.
Johnson, Director of IT, Transit.
Good afternoon, everybody. Rod Fournier, I'm the general manager in case. So first and foremost, welcome and thank you for coming. This is such an important topic that I'll take away anything that presentations.
Wonderful. Glad to hear.
I'm Ashish Spencer, I'm the Director of Transit Information Systems Coordinator.
I'm Jenny Rowland. I'm the Transportation Manager for the Boys Fort and Chippewa. Tony Wakeba from Boys Fort, and I'm a big dispatcher. Don't have to learn.
Yay.
I'm a newbie.
Yay. All right, well, I promised not to talk about how Tampa Bay beat the Patriots last night and Tom Brady prevails. I won't talk about that, but we're really very glad that you're here. This topic is a critical topic and you all are obviously acknowledge that because you're here. So let's get started. So I'm going to just quickly go over mobility management. Many of you are way more experienced than I in terms of mobility management work. I recognize a lot of your names from my 12-year history at Easter Seals. It's nice to see faces of people that I've been on the phone with or on Zoom meetings. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk with you. I'll go over a little bit at NCMM, and then I'll talk about CCAM, which is another riveting topic out of the Federal Transit Administration. I'm going to look at performance measures. And then I hope you're all here to roll up your sleeves because Steve and I have been working on a project around sustainability measures and how data and metrics facilitate the ability of mobility management networks to be sustained. And so we want your help as we as a national center are developing this national tool to be rolled out by the Federal Transit Administration. We want your input. So you guys are, in some respects, are guinea pigs, but I mean that in the nicest way, because the work that we're doing here today is really going to be pivotal for the field. So we look forward to you rolling up your sleeves. You see the Post-its around the board, and we hope to do some, as best we can with a group this size, some small group discussions. And then we'll resource share. I have tons of resources. Working at the national level, I sometimes feel like I get resources on my desk and I feel like they don't get disseminated to people who really could use those resources. So I look forward to sharing some of those tools that we have, and then we'll have a discussion and wrap up. First, telling you, I talk with a variety of groups, and some of those groups are people who have no clue as to what mobility management is. And so we at the National Center for Mobility Management have really come up with a definition that's supported by the Federal Transit Administration, which looks at mobility management as just connections. So building a system, building a continuum of mobility services. At the heart of that is the customer, the rider, the client, right? Developing a system that's responsive and supportive of the kinds of needs of the various riders in your communities. And it's the entire transportation network. So, sometimes we think of transit as one mode of transportation, but mobility management really encompasses a variety of modes of transportation, all interrelated. And the primary tenet of all of that is to build a system that's responsive to the needs of the community. Our national center, how many of you have used resources from NCMM? Okay, wow. What the heck have I been doing over 12 years? I want next year to come to this meeting and you all raise your hand and say, I love NCMM. I've been using their resources. We're free. We're a free National Technical Assistance Center funded by the Federal Transit Administration. It's a partnership between my organization, which is Easter Seals, and the Community Transportation Association and APTA, the American Public Transportation Association. And really, we work to do things like this. We provide technical assistance so the field can help build these coordinated community transportation networks so that everybody has a ride when they need it. And we work with healthcare providers and businesses and education organizations to help those audiences who are not transportation people, not mobility people, appreciate how important it is to have a focus and invest in transportation. And we'll be talking about some of those ROI measures in a little bit, but that's how we engage non-transportation, non-mobility people is by helping those audiences see the hook, helping those audiences see the value and the importance of investing in transportation. So NCMM, we've got tons of resources on our website, as I said, all free. I'm the regional liaison for FTA Region 1 and Region 5, and that means I provide intense technical assistance. So if you call me, we could do some research together, we do workshops, we build products. These are just some of the things that we do. The whole piece about mobility management and about identifying metrics and ensuring that there's transportation supports is about coordination. I forgot to mention there's people in Zoom too. So I hope you all can hear me on Zoom. Oh, okay.
19 folks in Zoom.
Okay, we have 19 people on the line. How many of you have heard of the Coordinating Council on Access and Mobility? Wow, okay. So a number of years ago, have you heard of United We Ride? The effort, United We Ride was an effort established in 2003, 2008, and it was at the federal level, and it said, okay, all of you agencies that have anything to do with transportation, you need to better coordinate your resources. So the Department of Health and Human Services, who you know has a big stake in non-emergency medical transportation, was supposed to come to the table with the Department of Education, Department of Labor, to coordinate their resources. I'll never forget the Federal Transit Administration, FTA, our project officer sent me a picture of 3 vans in front of the same apartment complex. One of those vans was picking up an NEMT person. One of the vans was picking up someone who's funded through the DD Council in the state. And another van was picking up an employer going to an adult training program. There was one person in each of those 3 vehicles. And so out of that came this notion of, well, if we coordinate, if we share resources, if we figure out how to maximize the use of our resources, we'll be more efficient and ultimately be more effective in terms of service provision. So that brought out the Coordinating Council on Access and Mobility. And you can see this slide indicates the federal agencies. There's 11 federal agencies that are involved in that effort, and it's going strong. I don't know if anyone participated in the state programs meeting this past week. FTA shared that they're moving on to develop a second strategic plan. And really, this is an opportunity for you to engage your state agency partners, the grantees that may be funded by these state agencies, because if you look at this chart, there's 66 Health and Human Services funded programs that pay for transportation or support transportation. There's 66 of these there's 120 programs total funded by various federal agencies that support transportation. Transportation is a support that should be born across these agencies. It's not just a DOT, it's not just an FTA service. And other agencies, other federal agencies and their state counterparts are realize that, and there's things going on at the federal level that I'm going to be talking about that create an impetus for you to knock on the door and say, hey, you know, transportation is part of your mission of your agency. Let's invest some resources in doing this. These slides are going to be available too. FTA developed a grading guide. Often we think you can't mix pots of money. So if you have money coming from FTA, we don't often think you can use money from the Health and Human Services or Department of Labor. Well, you can, and they have a grading guide to help you do that. So if the 5310 program has a match, you may be able to use dollars from another federal source that flow through your agency, through the state, as a match for those programs. And this guide helps you do that. So it's not only about funds, but it's also about sharing. So it's sharing vehicles. That example that I shared about one person on a DD person funded and another van with someone funded by a different agency, why not put all those people together in the same van? You know, figure out how to develop a cost allocation system so you know which agency is responsible for that person. Why use 3 separate vehicles? It's not a good use of seat capacity. And that's what we help as the National Center help the field to try to do, is try to figure out where can you make those connections? What does the federal regulations allow for you to use in terms of matching? And there's a cost policy statement on the Federal Transit Administration website that can really be the impetus for you to work with your counterparts that are funded by other agencies to figure out whether those agencies can fund your work. So let's look at performance measurement. I wanted to give you that context because I wanted to help you think that there's more than just DOT kinds of resources available, and we're not tapping them like we could be. And it's my mantra is it's about time for all these agencies that we know their clients, the people they serve, could not get to jobs. People can't access healthcare. People can't live independently in the community unless transportation is there. So let's invest. So performance measurement, when I say let's collect data, what are some of the challenges typically that when you're trying to collect performance measurement data, what are some of those challenges? I'm sorry? Accessibility. Accessibility of the data. So the people that have the data, they're not accessible in terms of you collecting the data. Right. Okay. Okay. So people, yeah, people have their data. They don't want to give up their data. That might mean they have to compromise something. They have to give up something. I don't want to give you my data. We hear that a lot with private providers, right? When transit agencies have relationships with Uber and Lyft and you want to share for MTD and you want to, it's part of your system and you want to let MTD know how you're doing. We've heard that Uber and Lyft are not happy about giving you their data in terms of riders. Yep, accessibility. What else?
I can count what I do pretty easily, but what I don't do, what I decline to do, I have a harder time counting it when I try to. I often duplicate. I say no to a client on this phone call, and then my coworker says no on a different phone call.
Right.
So it gets confusing.
So the managing the data, maybe having a system for organizing it and keeping track of it. Yeah. I thought you were going to say something else. I thought you were going to say, you don't have problems counting it yourself, right? So the number of riders you have, the number of vehicle miles you travel. What's harder is that second part of it, that impact part of it, the so what part of it, the outcomes. And that's what we're going to be talking a little about today too. What other challenges?
I was to say different formats of software that don't talk to each other.
Yep. the lack of interoperability between software. If any of you keep track of the FTA funded projects, those mobility on demand projects, I know a couple of you have gotten some of those grants. That's a really great way to see what the field is doing in terms of this interoperability, because FTA has given a lot of these grantees flexibility in their data collection in the way they typically do business. And so maybe you could get some ideas for how they're doing things. Yeah, anyone else?
Just clear up the file in the data so it makes sense to others.
That's right, right. And internally, so maybe makes sense to your own team, makes sense to your, the funders, makes sense to the community who you're trying to, want your ridership, you want their participation, you want their support as you're, trying to continue to get funds for your service. Yeah. So all these are challenges to data collection. Data collection is not easy, and we don't learn it in school. It's kind of like, it's an afterthought almost like transportation is an afterthought. I'm a educator by background. I used to work at the US Department of Education, and how I came into this field is I was working really hard on trying to get students with disabilities jobs and go to college after they left high school, and they weren't succeeding. Well, why weren't they succeeding? Transportation. If you don't think about transportation at every point, if you're making a healthcare appointment for a chronic condition, if you're trying to get someone off of social service benefits and TANF programs, how do you get people off of those programs if they don't have transportation to participate in a job? So here's measuring what matters, right? We collect data all the time, but you have to collect the data that matters. And this is the magic, figuring out what matters, what to collect, like ensuring that what you're spending the time, why is that important? How to collect it. I heard some methodology questions, like the system for data collection, how much to collect, is too much, is it such a thing as too much data? Probably, right? I mean, you won't know that until you collect it, but it's like how much to collect and how do you use the data? We collect data for a lot of reasons, and it just sits on the shelf, right? Some of our coordination plans just sit on the shelf, and we're really not using those to the benefit of what that plan is about. And then how to communicate about it. You go through all the motions, you invest money in a system of data collection and figuring out what to collect and how to collect it, how to analyze it, how to communicate, and then it sits. So figuring out what to do with it and how to communicate internally and externally is really important. So I love this comic. This is one man is handing another man a disc, and the caption reads, "Here's a list of 100,000 warehouses full of data. I'd like you to condense them down to one meaningful warehouse." Right? This is the notion of, oh my gosh, there's so much data out there. What do we do? How do we collect it? So I think it's all about understanding your audience. It's the why. There's a business guru named Simon Sinek. I don't know if any of you have ever read his work, but he says, before you start any data collection, you have to figure out your why. Like, why are you doing this? And the why is contingent upon the audience that you're talking to. So a rider may have their why is why do you want to have good service? Well, I want to have safe and reliable transportation to get to somewhere. That's what a rider, that's the why for a rider. A business entity, an employer in your community may say, I want to hire qualified employees who can reliably get to work. That's what would be important to that employer. Healthcare professionals want their patients to have good health. They need to get appointments. That's the why for healthcare professional. And for human services, I want the individuals I serve to access inclusive community options. So for a SIL, that's your why. That's why transportation matters. And so figuring that out from the get-go and incorporating that into your data collection plans is really critical. And that will help you communicate externally if you build that why into your whole process. What time is it? So what's so important about data and metrics? Well, do we all want feedback on how we're doing? You know, it's a gauge. It's a measure to let you know your own performance, whether you have to make corrections, whether you have to change a service you're providing, whether you have to change something about when the service is offered. That's an important use of data. It's also, it tells your story. The most compelling things that I see nationally is when transit agencies and mobility managers work together to create cases or stories about the service and about the opportunities that transportation service has. That's a qualitative data piece. So it's not, I gave 14 rides from 9 to 5 to 20 people. Those are the outputs. Those are the things. But the story about how that rider use that transportation service to get a job and to be able to sustain employment and then get wages that then help them feed back into the family. That's a story that resonates with legislators, local economic people, chambers of commerce. I remember being in a really rural part of Ohio, and there was we were talking about building a mobility management network, and it was a big employer who just had come to town with hundreds of manufacturing jobs, and he couldn't get employees. It was such a remote place. They hadn't thought about that when they lured this business to the community. And so now they were thinking about it. So at the table was this local legislator. And when he heard the story about if this company couldn't get employees to its site, that it was going to leave the community, don't you think that was an impetus for that legislator to say, well, we have some dollars that we've put together that could be used for transportation? And that was the why for that perspective. It contributes to the validity of the service. Certainly when you have the cases, the why, the stories, the impact, that leads to the public visibility of the service as being viable, and it adds to why you need continued revenue for your service. And funders require. You know, we know that FTA funds require a good amount of accountability and reporting. And so thinking about who's your funding, where's the funding coming from, and how to collect the right data for that funder is important. So this is just about collecting the right data. I want Steve to spend a lot of time on the sustainability piece, but I wanted to give you a kind of overview of the performance measurement. So knowing your challenge and problem is really critical. Know your solution strategy. You have to be able to articulate. You can't measure something if you can't define it. And so make sure when you're thinking about how to collect output data or outcome data that you're able to talk about the service, what it is you're measuring. Understand the metrics, the measures that you're going to be put in place and how, and what's the appropriate analysis. I mean, you probably have people on your team who are data analyzers, statisticians of some sort, to look at big, robust data sets and do something with it. Maybe partner with your local university. It's a really, you know, it's a good experience for local universities to be involved in this data collection piece, and then how to communicate and report. So what data is important to mobility management? I talked about outputs and outcomes. So this is a chart, and it has the outputs on one side and the outcomes on the other. So, you know, as mobility managers, we've got individual metrics that we use to measure our own performance, but we have systems and networks that we also have to measure. So if you're a state department and you're investing in mobility management across the state, or you're a transit agency, you have mobility managers, you want to evaluate the whole network. And these are some of the impact measures. Like, you're probably familiar with the outputs, the numbers of workshops, the number of products and communications. Those are outputs, those are widgets, those are tangible things that you could count. The outcomes or the effects or the benefits or the changes. And so there's short-term, medium-term, and ultimate impact outcomes. So one of the short-term outcomes may be learning. You want people to change their understanding or their knowledge of something. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you could see the differences. It becomes more intense. So a medium term might be a practice. So you want riders to, instead of using their personal vehicle, to use a transit system resource. You might want people in the community to support a tax referendum relating to a new transit initiative. So that's a behavior change. That's a intermediate change. And the ultimate impact are the changes in things like social, economics, and civic and environmental conditions. So something is going to change in the long run because of the service you provide. And there's metrics associated with each of these things. And this just gives you, it's not telling you what the metrics are. It's offering you some suggestions as you're developing your metrics to think about the categories under which the metrics can be developed. So what kind of metrics do you currently use in terms of outputs? I'll go back to that other slide, but outputs and outcomes. Do any of you collect outcome data? Do any of you collect any information about the impact of mobility management or your transit agency service on someone's health condition or someone's ability to get a job and stay in a job? Does anyone do that? You do. Tell us how you do that.
Just through surveys, people would write, we get rights to, we get rights from. And then we kind of follow and we track like employment, how much they're making, like when they go to the program, how much they leave.
Wow.
How many days they're working versus if they're on bed care, if they get health insurance, things like that.
Whoa, did everybody hear what he said? He tracks their engagement and work and what the impact is on whether someone's on managed care versus independent insurance through an employer. Those are pretty significant measures. It's tough, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's hard to do that. Follow-up isn't so great, but I think having measures like that, and what do you do with that information? Keep it. Do you ever communicate it? I mean, do you ever?
I have, yeah, we have some in the past, but when I started doing it, nobody cared about it. And then after I started doing it, people started calling and asking.
Wow. Yeah, that's impressive. That's really, you're telling a story. You're telling a story, the personal stuff, but you're telling a story economically. Don't you think that the Chamber of Commerce and the business development people in your community would like to know that kind of thing? And maybe that's an impetus for them to invest more in the transportation service. Yeah. Anyone else collect outcome data? Could you work with entities if you've got a service? And this, I'm working with the MPO in Indiana and another group of people who are building a mobility management network, and we're working with the healthcare system in the communities because healthcare providers have to collect outcome data in order to get paid by the government. And so if they don't collect these outcome data, then they don't get paid. So they have a pretty strong impetus to collect outcome data. So the transit provider and the MPO are working with that healthcare provider to understand of those outcomes, what populations, what people in the outcomes have used transportation and how did it affect their outcomes. So they already have the kind of will by the healthcare provider to want to do this work, and they just partnered with them to figure out how they could make it specific to transportation. So look for places like that. Look for entities in your community that have also a need to collect these data. The Health and Human Services sector has a big need. The SIL, don't you have to collect data regarding outcomes of the people that you serve? So, the Department of Education, ACL, who funds the SIL, the Administration for Community Living, requires that their state and their centers for independent living collect particular data regarding the services that they provide. Why not partner with your local SIL or your state independent living center and say, let's figure out what of your population have used transportation? How has it affected their ability to live in the community? How has it affected their ability to get a job? Those are the kinds of opportunities you can look for. You don't have to do this by yourself. You know, there's systems in many places already set up. So I talked about this, that there's multiple levels of metrics. So when you're thinking about building your data system, think about the individual rider, thinking about the community, the entities around you, and then what are the outcomes for you as a transit provider? What are the implications for your service? And the big question is ROI. I love ROI, return on investment. When I knock on doors and start trying to build partnerships, the first thing that these entities are asking is, what's in it for me, right? Why do I invest my time and energy into doing this? What's the ROI? So here are just some particulars that I've worked with places over the years. The satisfaction data is always important. You could use that in so many ways as you're telling your story. Satisfaction data for the riders, but also satisfaction for employers. I've worked with employers who said, boy, you know, since my partnership with the transit providers and mobility managers in my community, I've had more reliable employees. I'm going to stay. My business that employs 200 people in this community, we're going to stay here because I know that I have individuals who could get to my place of employment and not have to worry about transportation. The service use, so how people are using the services that you provide. Personal conditions improve as an individual. I want to share some of these with you. You know, I won't have time to go into them all because I want Steve to speak, but just give you some idea for at the rider level, what's important. And then here are some examples at the community organizational level, participation and access to community programs or employment, underutilized community services. I've worked with some places who, you know, build like a recreation center in the middle of town and people can't get to it. And then they've had a lot of, there was a lot of impetus to build the recreation center, but then no one used it and they couldn't figure out why it wasn't being used after everybody put money into this building the recreation center. Well, it had to do with transportation. Once they started partnering with the mobility management network and they could get people to the recreation center, it grew. So it was an underutilized community resources that grew. And that was a strong piece of data to support that collaboration. The cost of missed appointments. There's a lot of data, a lot of hospital centers are doing that kind of analysis. So work with your local healthcare providers and hospitals to see if they're already collecting those data and see if they're asking the question about transportation. And workforce recruitment. VR, vocational rehab professionals have a need to get people employed, and they have a need to understand why people aren't getting employed. And then here are some transit provider level data. Again, some of these are outputs, some of them are outcomes, but just give you a rich flavor of the breadth of all of this. So what's in it for me and my audience is use some of these, you'll get these slides, but use some of this text in your conversations. If you're building partnerships around data, these are some of the ROIs, the what's in it for me and my audiences. So, you know, you might think this is like all magic and the piece about sustainability, how to keep all this going, how to develop a thriving network is what we call sustainability. And Steve is gonna share more with you about this. And this is where you're gonna roll up your sleeves. So thank you.
Thanks, Judy. So this next section, as Judy said, we really need your help with this. So where we're at in the creation of the tool is, I'll give you some background. But we're at a point where we've put some ideas together. We've pulled from some research and some data and some existing measurement tools that are out there. But we're now at a point where you all can help us try to figure out some aspects of it. So what I'm hoping you're going to get out of this is that you will get some small bites of information. I'm hoping that they maybe do sort of a light bulb moment for you. And then you're really going to be called upon to use your own experience in this field and what you're seeing to apply it to how we're starting to organize the tool. So you are actually giving us content that we may in fact build into this tool. So that's how this is going to flow through this next section. So what we want this to be is a self-assessment tool. And we want it to help mobility management professionals. However, we are aware that within this room, we probably have pure transit providers that are in here. We have regional planners. We have people that actually have the title of mobility manager or perhaps do the work. We believe this is applicable to all of those. I think if we look at pure transit systems, the issue of sustainability is just as critical and interrelated to mobility management. So please, if you're sitting there and think that this doesn't apply to you, I would counter that I believe it does. So we want to measure the overall sustainability of the programs, identify the dimensions of sustainability, which is where you're going to really work today. And this is really a measure of stick-to-itiveness. And you all know this, if you've been in government work for a while, you have to have some thick skin and you have to just keep pushing forward and change happens slowly. So I told you that this was based on a background of two different tools that are out there. So I just want to highlight. Now, the next couple of slides I recognize are dense. I'm getting some highlights. You can go back later if you're really excited to drill down. But the first thing is Federal Highway Administration developed the Capability Maturity Framework. And FTA has looked at that and thought, how might we be able to adapt that to the world of transit and mobility management? But that hadn't really happened yet until this partnership with NCMM. So what they did was they created this framework with several dimensions. Their tool has 6 dimensions. And they've adapted it. I think they're up to 7 different frameworks that go across federal highway and the different components of it. And it was a way to get people to look and think through, you know, how are they going to get forward? How are they going to focus their thoughts? So if you look at the bottom, like prioritizing the right action is important. Is an agency ready? How do they know that? And what should they do? And then it encourages them to focus on a weakest link to do continual improvement. As we dove into that with FTA folks, we then became more aware of another tool that is currently in development. It's called the MURAT. And this is a partnership with FTA and the center, the Shared Use Mobility Center. And this tool is similar to the capability framework. It has dimensions as well, but the primary focus for them is innovation. How do you get there? How do you make these changes? And so they're doing some fabulous work. They're helping us with this project, and it's an iterative process. So I think what we're going to do is potentially we will come out of this with some solid tools that interact between these different agencies and different types of services. So I realize you can't see most
scary.
of this. But this is actually the Capability Maturity Framework matrix. That may, from where you're sitting, look very like, oh, really? Don't do this to us. But I will tell you, after studying it, it is actually simple. So let me tell you what's happening here. So the first thing on the left-hand side is where we have the different dimensions that have been identified. So I told you there are 6 for this particular capability framework. Ours, we're proposing 10 as of right now, which you'll see shortly. So it names, what is it? What is this dimension you're talking about? What exactly does it do? Then over here, these green boxes, it goes level 1 through level 4. And this is where the assessment part comes in. So what it does is it has a descriptor. So level 1 is where everything you're doing is kind of ad hoc. You can't, it's not really built in. There's probably not a lot of processes developed to support that, but there's something going on. You're getting there. So that would be sort of a baseline. Then all the way up at level 4, this would be, you've really got your system moving. You've figured out processes and you have strategies in place that keep you to continually go through these self-assessments, continual improvement, and you work through ideas so that you can get to more innovative and sustainable practices. We think that this is a good model for a self-assessment because we will provide a description later on with our tool that will help you get a sense of, well, what do you think a level 1 is? So we'll provide that to you, but then you can adapt it. One of the things that is really important to us is that this not be punitive. So in my work in New Hampshire with transportation officials, I recognize we're all accountable to federal and state funding and municipal funding streams often. And we recognize we've got to report on data and turn in all kinds of things. And a lot of times that can feel or is overtly punitive. And everybody's sort of in a duck and cover, like, I hope we comply this time around, we don't get slapped. This is not the purpose of this tool. While it can be adapted to a small agency, a region, or perhaps even a state, we want it to be a tool that is used, but does not become threatening to the work that you're doing. Because what I found, I'm working on advancing a mobility management network for New Hampshire, and we're really looking at performance measures. And I started to hear this, people were getting squeamish. So this is critically important to us. I'm hoping if we're successful with this, I'm hoping in the future that an organization will see the value and make it an annual type of thing where you go through this exercise. And perhaps someday you'll see that as kind of a requirement connected to funding. But again, the intent was not to make it punitive, something that you can consider doing so that you could actually go along with the funding, the responsibilities of the funding and the service you're providing.
And FTA, in using it with all those mobility on demand projects that they fund, and now us using it for the mobility management world, is not anticipating using this as a punitive or a funding lever of any sort. They really wanted us to convey today and in the future as we roll this thing out as a way for you all to assess and build your systems of performance measurement, accountability that will lead to long-term projects. I think they've learned over the years that their investments, you know how they invested a series of different kinds of grants. They had a AMP program, then they had a Rides to Wellness program, and now it's the AIM program. I think they're concerned about longevity of those projects. And so, you know, thinking about what does it take? What are the variables? What are the antecedents that really facilitate long-term sustainment of projects? That's where we want to go with all this.
Thank you for clarifying that piece too. So how can we use this? So we've talked about the adaptability of for all scales of organizations, wherever you are at in your development. But another process that we think about for this, and this, make no mistake, is a process. And right there, I want to put a pause. So I have a social work background, which makes me one of those processy guys. I know for some people, process is a 4-letter word. I want to urge you that good process, it's relationship building. You all know that mobility management is at the heart of it is relationship building. I would like to really urge you to think about how you're working collaboratively together within your organizations and then with your stakeholder partners. Because that's how you're going to develop buy-in. That's how people are going to be less concerned about why you're trying to measure something. They know that you're all working or rowing in the same direction, if you will. So I would like to propose that this tool actually is a type of process work. Just the experience of going through this with your team or whatever it is going to, I think, bring you all closer together with the work that you're doing, get you on the same page so that you're sharing and not working, not necessarily against each other, but you know how we can all sort of be going in different directions.
And the federal highway, I know you're, all of you out there who are like these hardcore technical kind of people are saying, oh, this is a kumbaya kind of moment. But really, the Federal Highway Administration has been using this for their projects, for their road projects for a long time. And the field is using this tool. So it works, even with those of us who are human service type, social service type, and those of you who may be engineering and transit types that don't typically do process stuff. This is a little squishy, but I think once Steve gets into the dimensions, you'll think about how it applies in your own setting and it'll make it less squishy.
Yeah, exactly. And we are going to sing Kumbaya next. But that's true. I think the process can feel a little more squishy. I don't think it has to, but you already heard my bias. But the outcome from this is definitely concrete. It's something that you can actually put into a strategic plan and develop all kinds of actions and go forward and then measure those actions in the future. So I think this is an intersection of both of those things right now. So this is an opening sort of discussion, because so far we have said sustainability, and we have no idea how you're reacting to that word sustainability. So what Judy and I found was when we started initially working internally with our FTA folks and the shared use, the SUMSI folks, we all of a sudden realized that everybody was holding a different definition for sustainability. I ran into the same thing in New Hampshire around our network when we use that term. So the next couple of slides are going to be a drill down into sustainability. But what I'd like you to do is we're going to be doing some small group breakout work right now. And it is going to be a tad challenging because delightfully we ended up with more people. But you can see the flip charts around. So it's basically group 1, 2, 5, 3, and 4, because that's the way you count normally. So it does not matter which one that you go to. I would suggest the one closest to you. But in those small groups, if you could do a very quick go around, you've already introduced yourself, so we won't do that. But if you could just within your small group, answer the question, how do you define sustainability? This does not have to be a doctoral dissertation. We want that first sort of response to that, because we're going to need to do this, because if we release a sustainability tool and everybody says, well, that's about the environment, well, how many of you will actually do that tool? I'm sure some will, but they may not make this connection. We want to get ahead of that. So once you're in your group, you're going to select a scribe and a spokesperson. For those of you that get a scribing role, we are using old-fashioned chart paper. We did not get the ones with a spell check on it. So spelling does not count. And your writing, just do your best to be slightly better than hieroglyphics, because I can't read those. So don't feel threatened by that. And so what we'd like you to do quickly is answer this question for yourself. We're going to give you about 5 minutes with this, and then we're going to do a very quick report out of maybe 1 or 2 sort of key or shared definitions of sustainability. Again, not a formalized definition. It can be components of it, just to figure out where we're starting from, and then we're going to drill down into that. So with that said, I'm going to allow you to move into your groups.
And there's markers on some tables around, so it's gonna be tough.
And folks online, at this point, I would encourage you to take advantage of the Zoom function. We have you muted here, so we can't hear you. So if you want to engage in an online discussion amongst yourselves answering this question, that would be fantastic. If you'd like to add any of what your group comes up to the chat, that would be great as well, because we can capture that and preserve it. Yes. Yeah. if you've seen the note on the top, that is for the next round, so don't worry about just writing when you get your
Hey,
sustainability.
Stephanie, can you hear me?
Hi, is anyone else
Good, hi,
available?
Kelly, I'm here. So sustainability. I can type stuff that we say into chat. I have no problem.
Okay.
I have it open. So sustainability.
It has to last longer than 5 years.
Okay.
Let's start there. If you do a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year project, pilot project, you want to make sure that it endures past.
Yeah, okay.
Tiffany, I would agree with that.
Okay.
Something that's going to use the resources into the future and continue beyond that 5 year and be viable.
Yeah.
It is, so it's, you're saying it's something that is viable. I would say it's something that becomes a part of the standard, the culture.
I keep thinking of turnover with employees and making sure, like, if one person can do it, yes, it's now a standard and passed on as for future in the same way. If it can't be passed.
Are you saying it has to be institutionalized? It has to be made part of the standard operating procedures so that it's not based on an individual?
Yeah, I like that standard. Yeah, making it a standard of, because if there's turnover and then it dies because it's not documented, or that's not sustainable. Or if one person, is willing and able to do more than what it is capable of, what other people are capable of, then that's not sustainable either.
And there's the financial resources.
It's a good point, making sure that it is, it's become a part of the bigger whole. Like, let's just say it's a new route or something like that that's going to be, I guess that's where I was thinking being viable into the future, so that it's part of the larger plan, and that you can financially
Think about
support it.
wrapping up.
So what I have written is basic, it's very brief. I'm sorry, it's not a really but I have last more than 5 years.
Make sure you've identified who's going to report out for your group, and then you're welcome to go back temporarily to your seats if you're more comfortable sitting at the table.
Anything else? So we've got the idea of viable, we've got the idea of like it becoming a part of the culture and being a standard. Is there anything that should be added to that?
I think that's good.
I think it's good.
Okay.
Thank you for being our secretary.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, it wasn't much, I gotta say, but I mean, it's very good.
Well, at least we have a group, maybe that, I'm not sure if they'll read it or not, because I feel like an outsider on the Zoom.
Yeah, a little bit, huh?
Oh, good, we can get to chat trends.
Yeah, I asked him to put it Okay, let's bring it back in, please.
And do you want to mention that the group online? I mean, maybe like this is what they said, or
You know what, we should read from this
Yeah.
group, 'cause-
Yeah, that's it, that Shelley said that.
Okay. So at this point, our online folks, they've been having a quick discussion, a little more challenging on their end, but we got something. So I'm going to start up here with a comment you can see on screen. So Shelley online said, it lasts more than 5 years, something viable, part of the culture must become a standard.
Like that culture, part of the culture, yeah.
So in no particular order except consecutive. How about? We'll just go around the room. Group one.
We kind of thought about our environments, like our work environment, not that. So we kind of came up with like, keep it going, finances, efficiency, performance, long-term success, partnerships, innovations, things like that, and knowing your resources, and understanding the gaps in your resources, and things like that.
Excellent. Great. Group two.
We're all over the place too. We've got so long-lasting and continuous. We've got managing funding and resources efficiently. Adaptable, diversified and inclusive, proactive, responsive, and consistent. Oh, also affordability.
Excellent.
Great.
Funding again, huh?
Jump to group five.
All right, so group five, we came up with 6 items here. First one, kind of a method or a plan to keep something going for long term. 2, long lasting, 3, continuous. 4, kind of a proactive approach to put tools in place so that you can keep something going for as long as needed. If it could be replicated, and then the last one, renewable.
Renewable.
Great. There, group 3.
Yes, group 3 set our top 2, but we shouldn't set our top 3. So concept doesn't outstrip resources was the first, and then org structure that can sustain change.
Oh. Nice.
What's your third one? Because I heard you make a comment specifically.
Yeah, just because we're group 3.
Yep.
We should have 3, but you're all.
All right, because you said something and it's actually going to appear on a slide shortly. And
He doesn't remember what he said?
Not compromising tomorrow.
there it is.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
Nice.
We just threw everything up on the board.
Perfect.
So, reciprocity, expandable, financial stability, ability to replicate, someone can step in to continue, serve for long term, proven results to grow, affordable, common understanding of goals, align with desires, self-sustaining, reliable, consistent, funding doesn't get pulled, ability to remain viable.
Excellent.
Nice.
All right, so this session is over. You guys are great. So this was excellent. The first thing, and I know I kind of primed it and set you up for this, but the first thing here is that it is not all about environmentalism. That can be a piece of it, and you all beautifully captured that with all the different elements of it. So let's do a drill down now.
It won't
Oops.
move. Yeah. Hey, I'll move it. I don't know why it's not moving.
Sorry, technical difficulty.
I'm gonna stop sharing. You could go ahead and
Fortunately, I have a paper copy. So the first thing we'll look at is the actual definition, who did I use? Oxford Dictionary definition of sustainability. So there are 2. The very first one is the ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level. That's it, period. Second one is avoidance of the depletion of natural resources in order to maintain an ecological balance. So there's clearly a relationship there. Historically, this term in the 70s, sustainability, environmentalism, as most of you probably know, that really became an increasing focus of folks. And so the language started getting used. And I think sustainability in a good way got more co-opted along the way. So then moving on from there, We want to say, well, what do the environmentalists think anyways then, if we're trying to argue for this? So I went out there and you can find all kinds of examples of people leading thoughts on this. I chose to go with Alberta University, and they have an Office of Sustainability and actually a degree program. And so they've done a lot of work around this, and I really liked what they had to say about it. So, next, perfect. We're back on track. So sustainability, right off the top, sustainability is not just environmentalism. In addition to natural resources, we also need social and economic resources. Embedded in most definitions of sustainability, we also find concerns for social equity and economic development. So already you can see your groups came up with elements of this definition. So the sustainability is a holistic approach, and this is, I think, critical to our application of this word, is it really has to look at your entire operation, including your infrastructure, your users, your business, organizational practices. The definition of sustainability is broad, and the world is a big, diverse place. So for sustainability to remain relevant, they say a useful tool is important that we adapt it to the local concept. If you're like me, I'm from New England. New Englanders, you know, they believe in fences and independent spirit and all of that. So I think it's important that we let people know it's okay to adapt. You need to respond to your local environment in the way it is. So that should be built into this broader definition. And the last thing is they say that sustainability is the process of living within the limits of available physical, natural, and social resources in ways that allow the living systems in which humans are embedded to thrive in perpetuity. So what he said, essentially. So now let's ground it in the world we have to work in. So let's look at what FTA has said about it. Now, I'm actually citing an active publication. You can find this on the FTA website. This was done 2010. So it's Transit Sustainability Guidelines. And it came out of their working group at ACTA. So when they looked at this, they said designing and operating sustainable transit and community transportation requires a new way of thinking. Sure. A transit system consists of the greenest of earth-friendly, energy-efficient facilities and fleet, but it does little good if it is not used. An empty bus cannot be a sustainable bus. I think that is a powerful sentence, and it's one that I actually like to hold back up to the government as well to periodically look at. Now, even though it used bus, and clearly there was an element of, they cited green and energy efficient, so there we are. I do think that FTA and APTA in this really does use sustainability or the environmental piece as a lens for this, but woven within that, I think, are our jumping off points. So again, they talk about if transit doesn't succeed in integrating with and serving the community, it can be environmental and an economic burden and even a scar upon the landscape. I think we've been exposed to a lot of how our transportation decisions in this country have put people at disadvantages at different times. So we can see how our decisions could have outcomes that we really just didn't intend. While successfully reducing transportation's environmental footprint, transit agencies around the world have enhanced the quality of life by making travel more enjoyable, affordable, and timely. Well, I would argue in the world of mobility management, that's all important, but we have an even more critical charge because we're making sure that older adults that don't drive, people with different disabilities can get out there to get where they need to go, get the services they need, the healthcare importance, the social connection. So I think there's an even larger imperative. And then the last part, for the transit industry to achieve true sustainability, it needs to do everything in the realm of sustainability, which is within the control or influence of transit agencies. This requires vision and occasionally radical innovation. So radical and government are often two words that you don't see together, but again, like I said, they see this, and the people I'm talking to, they get this. So why is this important for you? I think that if you bring this back, and when we release this tool, if this resonates and you think, you know what, we're going to give this a shot, you may be called upon to make these arguments. If this tool goes away, this could still be useful. You remember process guy here. So these type of discussions, if you could help people to expand the way they're looking at something. I had a conversation earlier in the day with someone here, and we had talking about something, but it was designing something before, and it was busing. And so the first thing that people did was, 40-foot bus. Well, we know that it does not have to be a 40-foot bus. There are all kinds of different ways to do that. So I think about my old days as a recreation director. I did a lot of public studies planning for community centers. So you'd start with this, come on in, everybody, tell us what you want in your community center. And people would look around, and what you could see happening was they would call up their probably childhood experience of a community rec center, multi-purpose room, some space where they grew up. And that familiarity means that's immediately what they start to spit out. So what I found is sometimes you need to help people look past their own experience and see what may be possible. That's where these little things and making distinctions between the definitions and explaining to folks how sustainability is more vast, I think is helpful and something that is important to the work that you're doing. Excellent, thank you. So here we are. This is actually our tool as a work in progress. So for our dimensions, they're on, again, the left column. So we're looking at organization, and I am going to go down through this because this is your next group work. So we'll put it back up on screen, but I want you to absorb this so that when you go into your groups, you can reflect on it. So the first one is organizational operations. I've also seen it like in the capability framework, they call it business processes. I don't know, I can't get my mind around that term. So we went with organizational operations. So it's really all that examines the internal operations of the organization, including basic systems, policies, resource management. I think this list is a perfect example of that, and a few others that were mentioned as you went around. So it's really, how is your little operation functioning? Let's say you're actually a regional transit council or coordinating council or something like that. Okay, so that becomes your organization, and you look at how that functions and what's in place to do that. Moving on to the next dimension is communications. So in this one, we examine how the organization communicates its mission, services, what else do I have there? Goals and needs internally and externally. So users, the public, and stakeholders. So the distinction we're making there, users obviously understand that. Stakeholders, I think, are all the folks that you work with, the public. So we all recognize that I would say the majority of our funding for these services are coming often from public tax dollars at the different levels of government. And so we recognize in our system that people need to vote this. So if we're asking the public to support officials that will support our work and to appropriate tax dollars to support our work, we have to do a better job educating the public, those non-users, so they understand the service. And I would argue that if we do that successfully, many of those non-users are going to convert and become users, maybe at a critical junction in their life as they get older, but nevertheless. Systems and technology. So this dimension examines the systems and technology used to efficiently deliver mobility services. So in this case, I realize in some of these dimensions, you'll think to yourself, well, wait a minute, but isn't that a part of organizational operations? Yes, but what we've done is we've made a distinction here. So this is on the delivery of your services. Now, if you happen to be just a bus and transit agency, okay, substitute mobility for the work that you do, and it will get you to the same place. Workforce. So this dimension examines the investment the organization makes in attracting and keeping good employees. What's it like to work in your organization? Do people feel inspired, encouraged to go better? Do they feel like they want to stay with an organization and move up through the ranks or expand their capacity there? So are you thinking about that? I think all of us are dealing with some major shortages right now across the country, especially CDL drivers, but certainly just other organizational personnel. I know in New Hampshire we are. So businesses are being forced to rethink how they work with their people. Culture and inclusivity. So I know we got a group down there that talked about D&I. Here we're talking about DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're examining both the internal, so your workforce, and the external, your customers, steps taken to demonstrate cultural sensitivity and inclusivity. So on your user base, you probably figure that out. So let's say you have non-English speaking populations in an area that you work. What steps are you taking to accommodate them? Are you translating various things so they know how to navigate and access your services? What's the experience like for them in terms of that? Within your workforce, where does these equity and diversity issues and inclusion fall? Are there people that are feeling like they're not really welcome there? You look at these issues. Next one is collaboration and coordination. So this will examine the ways in which your organization collaborates and coordinates with stakeholders, customers, and other providers. One of the most critical things I've found, and again, I keep going back to my experience in New Hampshire, but it's current. We have done more work in a year in New Hampshire on pulling together a mobility management network than has happened in 10 plus years, predates me. And it is because we are getting everybody to the table and we're having conversations. Incidentally, I know we're all Zoom fatigued, and hopefully someday this pandemic will be completely behind us and we'll never speak of it again. But I would argue that Zoom or another platform is a great tool. I had more participation and was able to conduct more small work group sessions by this statewide, people that would not be able to travel to me. So consider that actually as part of your systems and technology, but it does connect with collaborating. Next dimension, multimodal integration. So this dimension examines how the organization integrates multiple modes of transportation into service delivery. So earlier, I know Judy was talking and I've had several conversations, but how do you access that bus stop, if you will? Is it safe? Can somebody get there? Do they even have the means to get themselves to that, even if you had a beautiful sidewalk with crosswalks and bike lanes, all of that? So I know I have experienced a mix. So there are some transit or mobility agencies that do their thing, and they're pretty much siloed. And then in another part of DOT or user groups or advocacy groups, then you have the active transportation folks. I would argue that this is a disservice to all of our residents, not just our users. We should be integrating this. So Complete Streets is the bell that I'm sure many of you have heard of. It's a national movement to think about our entire delivery of service within one corridor, not just having exclusivity for one mode. Next dimension is performance measures. Judy said a lot about this, but I want to make the clarification about why it's here in this tool. This isn't so much about the measures you have, it's about the process for developing your measures. Identifying what you want to measure, what actually matters versus the boilerplate trip miles and things like that you're all used to, it's attached to the funding. So that process of developing them, that process for laying them out, so a tool, so some of you may have heard of things like a logic model. Logic models, the part of me that likes to be free-flowing cringes a little bit, but boy, does it do a great job sort of organizing this inputs, outputs, objectives, outcomes, goals, you name it. You need a tool. That's a check mark for sustainability. Then there's the tool about how do you collect it, and then the tool about how do you use it meaningfully. All things that you spoke about earlier in this session. In innovation, this dimension looks at how an organization identifies areas of improvement and its capabilities to make innovative changes. Here is a great intersection with the MIRAP tool, or the MIRAP tool, where that's focused on innovation. And I think people are going to be able to make some connections there as these two tools go forward. And then the last one is we do bring in environmental impact. We know we've got to do something. I think most of your agencies are working on that to some extent. So thinking about your fleet and whether it's green and you know, is that bus empty or carrying one person? Because that's not real sustainable either. So we do want to get at this. We do believe that sustainability itself should be in here, but we're qualifying it as environmental impact. Also, think about that in terms of funding, because as you know, CMAC, congestion mitigation and air quality funding, can often be used to fund parts of your service, depending on your state, how your state DOT will allow you to allocate. So we're now going back into our large groups, and you're going to have our small groups. And you're going to have more time to actually discuss. So behind every tablet, there are 6 pages, and they're all stickies. So go ahead and spread them out as you need to. So we're going to ask each group to think through 2 of the dimensions in our proposed tool. And the red writing or red or pink writing you saw on the top of these first pages, that's the dimensions that your group has been assigned to respond to. So what we want you to do in this, wait a minute, let me not get ahead of myself here. So what we're doing is a force field analysis. I'm not sure whether any of you have run into this before. It is one of those strategic planning type tools where some of the pre-work you do before you sit down and do your plan. But let me explain what that is. So force field. So I went with sci-fi, so you see you've got stars there. But it's basically the forces that come to play on your operation. And I mean any and all of them. You see that reflected in the dimensions. Think of the field as the context in which you're doing the work. So these different forces, so policies, funding, all those different components, those put a force on your operation. What we're going to be measuring, is this a negative force or is this a positive force? And obviously we want to build up the positives and do the negatives. So it was just a way to get you to dive into the dimensions. Now, when we complete this tool, there will be another column where we will talk about indicators for each one of those dimensions. Yes, we have some. We didn't want to lay those out. We actually were hoping organically that would come up through your conversations. So you're going to be doing this force field analysis. So you're going to answer the 2 questions below here when you're in your group. And you basically just go round and round. This is how I'd like you to set up your chart paper for each dimension. You could probably use 2 sheets per dimension, and one is supportive and one is unsupportive. In some cases, there are correlations, so you put the same thing on both lists, that's fine. Other times, it's a standalone item on one list or the other. So, most importantly, you can't see him, but that's my dog, Jedi. Use the Force loop. So if you're
His
Star
dog
Wars
is
fan-
really named Jedi.
Yeah, and he no longer likes me because I put Yoda ears on him for this picture.
Yeah,
But Jedi says, use the Force, transportation professionals help you with it. So if you're a Star Wars.
I think I can move that. That's Jedi.
It's Yoda speak. So, yeah, and Jedi makes many appearances on Zoom calls.
I didn't understand that because I don't know Jedi, but.
Yeah.
All right.
So anyways, before we start making noise, I want to make sure that everyone is feeling fairly comfortable with the instructions. So you're going to go back to your groups. You're going to have about 15 minutes. You have 2 dimensions assigned to your group, and you are doing this force field analysis. You are filling in these 2.
What's
So you're answering
supportive
these
and
2
what's not
questions and
supportive.
filling them in. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay.
Okay.
We'll be wandering about, ask questions. Otherwise, I'll give you a warning and then we'll call you all back. Folks online, again, I appreciate how difficult this is for you to do this in this format without a lot of guidance. But if you could actually have that group conversation, and if you could put some things into the chat, that would be good. Now, I did not assign you any specific dimensions. So if any of you want to just pick a dimension to talk about, that's absolutely fine. Thanks.
Group 5, we had 1 piece of paper.
Oh, I will bring some more back.
Okay.
Anybody online, remember what the dimensions are, because I didn't write them down off the previous screen.
I took a picture of it.
Oh, fabulous.
So I'll read them off. I have organizational, operations, communications, systems and technology, workforce, culture and inclusivity, collaboration and coordination, multimodal integration, performance measures, innovation, and environmental impact.
Okay.
How about coordination and collaboration?
I was just gonna say that was a lot of them. So Mason, you're looking at them. Let's coordination, collaboration, and one other. Can like pick another one. Because my brain does not like, I can't keep that many things.
Performance measures was another one, and that's something we're having to do.
I think that sounds good.
Well, I don't know. Okay, what does everyone else think? All right, so we'll do coordination, collaboration, and performance measures. Let's do that.
Can they mute that?
I want to. I'm
wondering
gonna
that
try. I'm gonna try. Let me see if I can mute them. I can't mute them because I'm not a presenter. Wonder. Yeah, no, we can't. Unfortunately. Could have some discussion by chat.
Well, I would say that one of the forces supporting coordination is Minn Kota and the RTCC structure.
Okay, where's the coordination and collaboration? I can't spell, guys. I'm not.
It's really hard.
I mean, like I get close.
I said the RTCC program.
Yep,
is
I got it. So
okay.
Supportive would be the RTC structure. I'm sorry, guys. I have construction going on in my house right now too. RTC structure and Coda, you said.
Yes.
Anybody else?
We have to like list something that is unsupportive also. That's what we're supposed to.
Yeah,
I think so.
No, I think depending on the area of the state, some of the supportive forces are also just the relationships. I know in a lot of the smaller areas of the state, we do have a lot of close-knit relationships. You know, Tiffany, our organization, yours, does that jive with everyone?
I'm sorry, I kind of missed some of it. I think what you were saying is that there's some parts of the state that have a lot of support and some that are smaller and are not included in those support systems.
Well, I'm just thinking like for supportive measures, one of the things in some instances, it's very spotty, but in some instances, one of the things that we have is relationships, strong relationships within areas of the state, within certain sectors, basically. But yes, you're also right. What you're saying is there's also some supportive stuff that comes from the state level that don't want to. I don't know, what do you guys think?
I'm just having a really hard time hearing over the group.
Yeah, I wish I could get their attention and ask them to mute themselves, but I can't. I mean, if I could yell over chat.
The folks who contributed, did they put their thoughts into the chat? That might be a little bit easier for us to follow.
Well, here, I'll put what I said.
There you go.
I say let's start just chatting using the chat function, and we'll do it that way.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Especially right now.
What? 10?
Well, almost 11 now.
Oh. Hey, Judy, can you mute the room? Nope, they can't hear us. I tried.
All right, if you could do a 30-second wrap up of any thoughts and then return to your seat, but make sure you have a spokesperson, please. Because there's some value in this question.
Yes,
and we'd be poised to-
Right. Need for data.
Yeah, if I see it from my All right, let's bring it back, please.
Oh, they were talking about lots of schools.
Oh. All right, so we're going to do a brief report out. We have one follow-up question for the entire group after the report out, and then some closing information. We did get a tiny little bit late start, so if you just indulge us to finish, but we do want to move it along. So for that reason, reporters, if you could do just a little 1, 2, 3 sort of highlights that came out of it, just so we can quickly move. We will be capturing all of these so that we can actually incorporate your thoughts into our continued drafting. So let's see, I started here. Group 4, you ready to go? All right, yeah, I know.
Multimodal integration, supportive around communication, it's part of science and building actions. Understanding the structure, You know, the bus that goes down the road with no limit, it's better than mandated, let's get rid of it. Safety standards, tell a story with your data. So everybody doesn't want to do data, tell stories for data. Cost benefits, this is an example from Missouri. They are, instead of trying to determine what people are getting out of being able to get to their medical appointment, instead of determining what they're getting, what they use is they take the insurance amount for every appointment and calculate how much the medical provider is getting, and then gets the medical providers to provide funds to do those.
Wow.
So it's a different model. The non-supportive expectation, attendance, staff, whatever people, interpretation of performance measures, consistency, and translating data for whatever audience you're talking to, making it understandable to different types of learners.
Yeah, Missouri has a project called HealthTran. I don't know if any of you have been to their website where they've captured exactly what you said, and they have a subscriber model where healthcare providers pay like an annual dues to be part of this transportation network. And then as their patients are scheduling appointments, they are arranging transportation at that same time, paid for by the healthcare providers.
They're also trying to write funding into their grants, hospitals.
Yep.
Thank you, group 4. Group 3.
So our first one was alternative inclusivity. As a positive, we have the community collaboration, employer, education and training partnerships with organizations for hiring pipelines, kind of HR integration programs. For negative forces, we have that minority is variable with politics, language barriers, kind of traditionally well outside this way, not aligned between communication mechanisms of lesbians doing overwhelming factors. And then for collaboration and coordination positives, funding availability, technology and resources, we have always a positive and a negative, depending on how you're looking at it. Shared appreciation of common goals here, lack of awareness of common goals, more disconnected, lack of focus on the industry events and through networking support collaboration, but when there's a feeling that the jobs are overwhelming or there's distance geography issues that can be it.
Great, thank you. Nice work. And group 5.
We're all feeling totally unsupported here. Environmental impact, supportive, we felt there's a community desire to make an impact, and we had monies made available through CARES funding and other sources. But so unsupported. We have extreme weather conditions we're dealing with. We have non-efficient buses. We can't get our buses replaced. We're over a year behind getting new buses. And infrastructure such as charging stations would be really costly if we would use the buses. And then innovation. There are apps and things that are coming down the pipeline so people can schedule rides. That was our only supportive thing. Unsupportive vehicles lack the capability to have many wheelchairs or multiple wheelchairs with them. The wheelchairs sometimes don't fit on the buses, they're too large, they're hard to secure, there's so many manufacturing differences and makes it really hard. And then the style of the buses needs to change. For example, in Europe, they have the driver sits in a different kind of compartment, has greater visibility, can see better when they're driving. And then some of our folks want four-wheel drive buses because of where they live.
Great, nice work, group 5. Group 2, please.
So, at the workforce, any one of these, when you look at this, it just brings out the best in people and those who want to do the work. So when you look at continuous training, civic-minded employees, positive culture, leadership, and we were talking about certain type of leadership, advancement incentives, and meet people where they're at. And so that really is probably, if that would be perhaps a mission of a supportive workforce, it would probably start with that statement. And I think this is pretty easy to look at and say, who would want to work at a place that has low wages, driver shortages, poor management, technology, tools, and lack of communication from frontline to management.
Sign me up.
Yeah, sign us up.
Great, thank you, nice work. And last but not least, group one.
With organizational operations, we're talking about leadership buy-in or not buying in enough. That can help and hurt. Structure and size as far as staffing, abilities to do that, as well as technology, grant funding, and clear goals. And then also lack of help, IT, lack of grants, et cetera, unclear goals or objectives can also help hurt. And then on communications, are they supportive, outreach, marketing, training, technology, all that goes together. And then unsupportive would be just if you're unclear, how are you interpreting these messages? Are you giving the right translation of it? Are you having high level language, low level language? You gotta have everything. And can you translate things as well to different languages that are in your community? So things like that. And then of course, technology, Zoom, things like that. And then partnerships, like you mentioned earlier, how are those different partnerships in the community, or you might have free services, how can you connect all of them or get them all on the same bus and things like that.
Excellent, nice work, group one. Go ahead, you can take it.
So overwhelmed and underwhelmed. So system technology, what the big source of system technology would be mobile apps. Automated reporting, we were talking about text regulations, real-time technology, return on investment, we were looking at these types of technology, efficient scheduling, tracking funding sources, having a relationship between that, and accessible design. What is unsupported is no funding, intensive grant process, no cellular or broadband connectivity, and systems do not talk to each other.
Great, thank you for adding that back. So fantastic work. As always, I go out into groups and I am struck by how much I learn. So I think we are all the experts. We know our business, we see it, we're on the ground, we know what's happening. So I would say this tool doesn't happen, NCMM goes away and every other thing. You could get together and talk regularly like you did today, and I guarantee you could solve a great many of your problems, or at least chart a course. One of the things I found is that on a statewide level, these type of conversations where you're literally flip charting and things can be a little bit like, oh, please. But those often don't happen. And yet you all do have your solutions. I realize there are forces out there that you can't control. But thank you so much. We are going to take this and adapt it. I'm already thinking about some things. You saw how different groups, you can see overlaps, how they fit into the different dimensions. We expected that. So this has been incredibly helpful. The last question we want to ask you as a large group about the tool is, what would make you more likely to use the MSAT when we release it? So ideas, the design of the matrix. Would it be better if it was electronic type assessment, expand or reduce the number of dimensions, change the grading, you name it, everything's open. But just like Judy talked about performance measures, data, and strategic plans, we don't want this to be the Dead Sea Scroll that goes and never gets opened again. So hopefully we can entice you to use this. So just open free form. If you have to have something to say or a suggestion for what would make you want to use this tool, go ahead. No, Judy, they don't want to use the tool.
Oh, no.
Sorry,
Our work is done. Yeah.
I mean anything and everything. When you think about, we've just said, look, we're trying to create this tool to measure, a process tool to measure sustainability across all of that you do. So we're trying to figure out, well, how would that work most effectively for you? So anything, as far as I'm concerned, everything's on the table. We're going to capture it.
Easy to operate and maintain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to capture yours again.
Yeah,
So
like a written reference, something.
Written like guidelines, instructions.
well, I think a written tool, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. So could we call that like a group where you actually convene and you work collaboratively in a group setting? Are you thinking like that?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we were always thinking that this is like a mobility management network, a coordination council can get together and do this collaboratively to look at each of these dimensions and think about how it applies to the system of what we're doing. And although individually too, but I was envisioning more of a group.
I was gonna say, are you able to put your input in and have others look at it to I guess, suggest or put their input that, oh, we built this, how we do it.
So within your, whatever the body is that's using this tool, got it. Thank you.
I have to repeat, I heard this, it's all my mind, but I always want to know what their agencies have and how they did it, how they got there, and, you know, the procurement is cost estimate, justification, all this stuff, it's already done, I don't want to redo it, so just to have all the information that their properties are going to be helpful.
So could we take that a step further potentially? Should we have an eye to, okay, your organization, region, whatever is using this tool, but here back at NCMM, should we be looking at a potential way to get some results from these local tests to share because it could help? Is that a piece?
We just did the Minnesota State Technology Plan, whatever that's tomorrow's event anyways, and we formed a transit technology committee out of it just to figure out what everybody's doing and how they can get their faster from grant process to planning to everything. So I think it's obviously worthy.
Thank you.
I'm responding to expand or reduce the number of dimensions. I think the if it can be designed or perhaps the training so that organizations or entities can select and understand the dimensions that fit them at the time. So not all dimensions fit them while they're in the process of building. So it might be an iterative type process. So and maybe to look at the tool that perhaps if only one or two of those dimensions are used based on the current status or phase in organizations, then they can add or build on other dimensions. So I think if anybody's interested, maybe only using one or two, that this tool will still be welcoming.
Yep.
That was really well said. I talked about the levels and saying that, you know, this is a punitive. So if you're at a level 1 startup type situation, you know, that's fine. You took it a step further. That's a great point. Thank you.
Really simply said, and then it's like.
Was there somebody behind the pole? I thought I saw a hand moving. Yeah, okay. Over to.
You can make your model flexible. So we're not taking our problem and molding it to your way to compare it like a herringbone diagram, and you're taking your problem and contorting it, twisting it to fit in the diagram instead of the diagram, helping you solve the problem so that we're not trying to square peg on the whole.
Thanks. That's definitely food for thought.
This might be a big ask, and I think somebody mentioned that they're easy to use, straightforward, and above all, not time consuming because we are all struggling with resources.
Yep.
Strictly from a metrics numbers perspective, we're not all having the data entry processors of how the data is going to be exported from our system into your system. Again, from a number perspective, not a procedure.
Got it.
Whereas Excel, CSV.
Yeah, that was a great build off on your comment on performance measures themselves. Good. Other thoughts?
Yeah, we know that states and regions are inundated with plans, right? You have to do a plan for everything and never the plan shall meet. And we don't want this to be just another process or plan. So what you just said makes total sense. And maybe we could think about language that helps people see the connection. So if you're doing a human service transportation plan or a TIP plan, that it shows the connections and the value. for your ability to do those other plans and connect them.
So I think we're gonna wrap up the tool here. Judy's just gonna fly through a couple of closing slides primarily to get to our contact info. But again, I just want to say for my part, thank you for the invitation to be here. Thank you for helping me learn, and I look forward to supporting our industry community the best I can.
And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is just, again, all of this matters because of these things. And this is a way to justify your time effort and resource effort on these activities once you get back to your own communities, making better resource allocation decisions. It facilitates the credibility of what we all do and the viability of what we all do, demonstrates the need, the continued need for coordination. Some of the things, it just feels good to know when you're building something that informs you about sustainability and long-term implementation, that feels good to you as a provider, to you as a participant in the network, to know that there's longevity in what you do. I love this quote. This is from Susan Scott in a book called Fierce Conversations. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And this is kind of different thinking, and hopefully will kind of facilitate your creative juices on how this can apply in your own setting. This is just some suggestions when I've done other workshops on other topics. This is what people do with the information, some real tangible activities that you could take, whether it's related to performance measurement or the CCAM work or the stuff we've done around sustainability. These are just some activities that you could follow up with in your own settings. I put the CCAM resources that I mentioned here. You'll get these slides, so you'll have hyperlinks to them. There's also something that this is FTA project called TACKLE, Technical Assistance Coordination Library, and all of the National Technical Assistance Centers are required to participate in building a library around coordination. So if you want examples of how an agency is partnered with HHS, or examples of how Missouri HealthTran has garnered the participation in healthcare providers, or how the Department of Labor is funding a transportation work program in Ohio. You could go to this library, and again, it's all free because it's national TA resources, but I wanted to make sure you had that. And here are those technical assistance centers that I hope you take advantage of. And there's my contact information and Steve's contact information. And I reiterate what Steve said. Thank you for inviting us here. I've loved interacting with all of you. I hope that you'll call us when you need something, continue to tap into our resources. But thank you for the work you do, and always be safe. So thank you. Okay.
On that website?
Yeah. All the information. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
I wanted to say hi. I was talking to you a little bit on email. Yeah. Let you guys know what all the resources are.